Going to the cloud. So we're going to welcome to the first week of Expert to Teacher. So it's first week in review, community engagement and expectations session. So just going. Okay, sorry, Mary Wiseman is here. And I am Kyle Kraus. I'm your presenter, and my amazing co-host on the online side, Marisha, she is there as well. So the premise of this series was to be able to have topics that were relevant to the timeline of a semester. So if we're teaching a 14-week semester or a 7-week semester, as people who are kind of newer to teaching, to be able to have conversations about what's going on for you, but also to interject theory or practice or information for you to kind of explore, and then also just talk about the processes that are happening on campus. Beth, could you, so I've introduced myself. Beth, can you introduce yourself?
I am a new day teacher, SALC. I am a math and ELA teacher in the morning.
Okay.
I have one class of each, and I'm getting pretty good at this Zoom for the most part. But being a new teacher, having students that I'm trying to engage with, it's difficult. So I'm here to see what tips and tricks and whatever that you can teach me.
Okay. And are your classes majority online, or are they in
Both
person?
of them are.
Okay.
They're both online. Yeah.
Okay.
I have classes Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from 9:30 to 12:15 with 10-minute break. Primarily the same students in both classes, but 2 different subjects.
And just to remind me, is it Blackboard that you're using, or?
I can, but because the math needs more than just the Blackboard, I am using a camera onto a whiteboard so I can write and you can see. I'm also using PowerPoint, if I can manage to get that going right. And it's difficult for math.
Okay.
So I'm using those 2 avenues right now.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So hopefully you'll get a takeaway of a little bit more about kind of engagement and the things that we would do in the first week of classes. So, so just to let you know, the series goes, there are 8 weeks. In the 8 weeks of the semester, we go through different topics throughout, from the beginning of starting a class to also the issues that come up midway through, and then also campus policies and procedures, as well as we're going to talk about when we get towards the middle of the semester, preparing for the end, that kind of like what kind of closure activities might you do, what kind of things do you do to wrap up your semester. So we're going to do that in the first 8 weeks so that when people are then either done teaching, if they're doing a 7-week class, or someone is teaching the full semester, that they would be able to kind of prepare for that. So the first thing is that I'm just going to really quickly kind of go over the structure of how our time together will be. So basically what happens is that every time we want to make sure that we're doing some type of check-in with people. So how was your week? What came up, what challenges, what are the positive things that happen? Beth, you get to have a moment of, solely an audience of us listening to you. But then also just a really brief, like literally a couple-minute presentation just to introduce you to some interesting things about teaching specific to the topic of the week. And as I mentioned, that this one is going to be about reviewing your first week, community engagement, and expectations. Then we do a really quick activity, which is going to actually be related to the presentation today. And then we're going to look at the academic calendar and semester tasks for things that might be coming up, so that if there's any questions people might have, make sure that they know where the academic calendar is, that kind of thing as well. And then we'll end every week with kind of a teaching challenge. This is literally something that's completely optional, that if someone would like to go out and try a new thing in their classroom, we've taken a couple things that you can kind of consider to do on your own and see how that works. And then and then from that, we do have an exit ticket, which is a Google form, and you'll be able to complete that and submit that to let us know how the session went, and also just to give us some heads up more about topics that you'd be interested in the future. So with that said, is everything all good? All right. So the first thing that I'm actually going to do, and I'm going to not do a screen share for this, is we're just going to do the check-in part, which was, Beth, how was your week? What came up? Challenges? What were the positive moments that you had this week? I'm just going to stop sharing for a second so we can be all together on the screen.
Okay, you wanted me to?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. Week was crazy. Challenges, the biggest challenge was trying to get the students to turn on their video and to participate in class. I had only about 8 students, and out of those 8, I had 3 who would verbally occasionally answer questions, 1, and sometimes the second one would have their video on. The good thing about this week was Ian Noonan is my immediate supervisor or whatever, and he has been helping me tremendously. He took over the ELA class this week because I wasn't sure about an ELA class because I'm a math person. And he did the first day of both ELA and math, and then I took over the math on Wednesday and Thursday. So yeah, it's been very crazy this week.
Any positive interactions with students that you can, I think we always like to hear if there's.
Any students that I interact with who answer or, have questions has always been positive.
Yep.
I don't know what the others in this particular meeting teach or levels, but I'm teaching the adult learners so they can take the HiSET test. They all want to be there. They all want to learn. They all want to get the knowledge to pass their HiSET test. And so they're all motivated.
Awesome. That's great. I think Marisha and Mary, I don't think have currently classes. And I don't think, Mary, you have any classes at another school at this moment. No. I would say, so I teach first year experience. I think for me, it was a good week. I'm teaching the same class, but it's thematic this semester to undecided students, and then another section that is to social and behavioral sciences. So I'm trying to make sure that I tailor that class to those audiences. I think that's going to be an interesting challenge that I hope that I'm able to meet from my students. So I think that's the one thing is you can teach a class the first time or teach all the topics, but then when you throw a curve to it, trying to make sure that you really do, I'm hoping that the outcomes that I worked on actually kind of help make it more of a relevant personal experience for those students, given that the class is specific to their majors or that they're undecided. And probably same with you, Beth, is every interaction I generally have with students is pretty positive. A lot of times they're just confused or lost and they need help. And as long as you just take the moment to help them, they're usually, they just keep going. They just get back on and keep going. So yeah, that's kind of all I have too. So thank you for sharing that. I think ultimately for this particular week, what we wanted to do was kind of do reflection and then kind of also do a little brief presentation of information about community engagement and expectations. And I think one of the things that we also talked about with community engagement is that how do students develop? What kind of things can you do in the classroom to kind of engage students? Now, Beth, you and I are both online faculty. In this session, we could have a mix of other people if people come in the future of different methodologies. So what I did was I looked for some articles, and I'm just going to put this on the screen, and we'll share this information after the session with people. But we have 2 videos to watch. One is going to be, and Marisha, you're going to have to help me to make sure that I set the whole audio sharing thing right. The first one, getting to know your students, is a video. The second is going to be norm setting at the beginnings of the semesters. These videos are very short. I think the first one is 3:40. It's about 4 minutes. And then the other one is about 2 minutes and 50 seconds. So these are very short videos, but I thought that they were really great videos to just give some inspiration about how you can be in the classroom or to reaffirm your teaching. And so while we're watching the video, and this is kind of the homework for Beth, and if Marisha or you want to kind of jump in with this, is when watching the video, I'm going to kind of do a call to action. Is what I'd like to do is an affirmation of a practice you currently do if you see it. So as the professor is talking, if there's something you do, and for Marisha and Mary not teaching, is there something you do in your practice that you see in that classroom experience? Because learning happens everywhere. Is to kind of do this thought process of what do I do that's being mentioned, and affirm yourself to knowing that that's a common practice or that's a practice that you also see value in. And then if there's something different that you think would be interesting, and then also if there's something that you kind of have questions for. I'm going to try to focus on, I couldn't do that, that won't work in my classroom. I want us to really talk about when we see something that it sparks interest in us that we could do different or challenging or reaffirm us, and not to just necessarily dismiss something being like, that can't work in my discipline or that doesn't work in my classroom. Take from it what inspiration you kind of can. And a lot of the materials that we'll show over the semester may not match your teaching style, but they are critical thinking materials. So I want you to be challenged by someone who might show a teaching perspective that is not yours, or might be completely aligned with yours as well. The last thing is going to be, and we're not going to actually talk about the last thing. I just wanted to put this out there, and when you get the presentation, you'll actually be able to link to this. What I also wanted to make sure in this series is that we provide resources for common, what we kind of call the canon of student development, academic development, curriculum development. And so articles that I know that across the board, Mary, myself, Marisha, my colleagues, classmates, whenever you do anything, you take educational classes of how to teach, instructional development, educational modeling. There are some philosophies, some people who are pretty much kind of like the cornerstone of a particular area. And some of these are longstanding, but also some of these have been challenged over the years. So I wanted to throw out so that people get exposed to what instructional designers, other people in teaching and curriculum design, what kind of things that they see to expose them. So this isn't a cookie cutter, you read this article and then that changes the way you teach, but it's this is student involvement, developmental theory for higher education. Alexander Aston is considered one of the prominent researchers of the last couple decades, who's very, very prominent in the 80s and 90s. And he kind of modeled student affairs and the work with where students get their involvement, how they get engaged and involved in college settings. Predominantly, I believe, was four-year institutions. However, his theories, it's actually Aston's student involvement theory. That's what it gets called. And it's really very popular. This is a very short and concise article by him where he kind of basically goes over his student development theory. And the basic premise of it is that students don't just learn in the classroom. There are multiple mediums and modes of where they can do it, and how their exposure to various parts of campus are also part of their learning process. How do we bring the academic and the student side together, the student affairs side together, but also that students learn in so many ways and to respect that they learn those ways as well. So I just really like to give out that article. People can look at it. I know it's a busy time of the semester, so I just wanted to expose people to something that I thought was kind of one of the cornerstone theories of student development theory. Student affairs professionals read this article usually in their first years of their programs.
Kyle, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
You're not sharing your screen.
Oh, it's not? Thank you. I thought I hit the button. My bad. Now? Yes, thank you. Okay. Okay. So, but anyways, with all that said, the first one's a video, the second one's a video, and then the far right one, the student development, that one is going to be the article that, and these are all links that you can click onto. So what I thought we could do for a few minutes, everyone's cool with this, is why don't we watch the getting to know your students? And as I said, you're going to look for practices that affirm your own practice, look for things that might be interesting or changes, and just kind of an observation of the video itself. So this is where I'm going to need Marisha to kind of help me a little to make sure I'm clicking on the right things to load the video to play.
I'm gonna turn off
Okay. All right. So how does that look, Marisha, for watching, or should I see if I can expand it out?
Yeah, the full screen looks great.
All right, so you also just tell me if the sound works when I start playing it. All right, so this first one is getting to know your students.
No sound yet.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember if there is.
Dan is one of the most engaged professors I've ever encountered. What separates him from the rest is that he truly takes his time to get to know students on the individual level.
Ignacio, what did you think about what Kat said about physics being superior to economics?
I totally agree with
You
Kat.
totally agree. For those of you who don't know, he has a PhD in physics. Okay. And now you want to be his friend, right? Okay. All right, go ahead.
I assume because the lower the standard error, the higher the T statistic.
So I think there are many ways to foster a positive classroom environment. The number one way in which I try to do that is try to learn as much as I can about my students before I step into the classroom. Assignment 0 is a survey where I ask about their background in the subject, what they want to get out of the class, something about their work experience, 2 or 3 interesting things about them. And, you know, with 50, 60 students per classroom, I think it's very hard to learn all of that information quickly, but it gives me ways of connecting with individual students from day one that I think help create an atmosphere of, all right, this instructor is interested in what's going to happen in this room.
I certainly think with Dan, in Dan's class in particular, there is a sense of informality and a sense of fun. Dan's often walking around the class, and I as an individual often will crack a joke or something, and that's very much kind of appreciated and taken as part of the fun. And I think that makes speaking less of an ordeal, especially people that less used to public speaking or less enjoy speaking up in class.
Okay, so we're going to add an assumption to our model called homoskedasticity. This is a kind of term that you learn here, and then on the weekend, you go to a bar and you say you've learned about this, and you look really cool because you know about all these technical terms that people will be very impressed by. I try to use humor. I try to understand where the students are in a particular week. If they have had an exam, that might lead to a different, at least initial state of the class. If we're about to start a difficult pasture in the class and I see some tension in the room, I try to do things to at the very least acknowledge that that's there, so that students don't feel this is a machine teaching them, but rather a human being who's trying to connect and stimulate their learning.
So I'm going to go just back to my It's a me being challenged by, I think that's what I want. There we go. So if we're looking at, after watching that video, and did it not go, I need to reshare. There we go. Hit refresh now. Yeah. So if we look at that video, and if while you're watching, and you're in the hot seat, Beth, what of the things in there did you see that maybe affirmed that you might already do, and what were something interesting that you maybe watched from that video?
A couple of things that I think I would like to do, or will do. One is I should have this past week done some breakout sessions with each student to get to know them better. And that's what I'm going to do this coming week, is do some breakout sessions, invite one student at a time and just talk with them one-on-one, instead of as a whole class where everybody can hear what's going on. Because in my opinion, and I think most opinions, that what's said in the classroom is going to stay in the classroom. And so what a student confides in me about basically is going to stay there. Obviously, with the exception of somebody harming himself, but that's a different story or a different topic. The other thing is that teaching both the ELA and the math, there are a lot of, well, the ELA is mostly all English, and the math, a lot of word problems. And he talked about having humor or jokes or what have you. And I'm thinking, putting some humor in those word problems would be a lot of fun, hopefully. But I think I'm going to try that and maybe find some articles that have more a humorous tone to them, instead of this last article that to me was very dry. So I'm going to see if I can get some more humor into that. And I like these little simple 2-sentence jokes. So I'm thinking of throwing that up there with the warm-up, and maybe that will lighten the mood a little bit in the class. So that's what I got out of it.
Marisha or Mary, do either of you want to interject?
The only thing I would say, Beth, is to think about your word problems from a standpoint of, do your students comprehend everything in the word problems?
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Sorry, let me come up a little closer. What I was saying is,
Just before you start, can you hear now?
yeah, can you hear me now?
Better.
I would just urge you in your math problems to be sure that the language is something that the students can understand. I've worked with math teachers who have language in a, like a story problem that might say something about acres, and students might not know what that means. Those kinds of things.
It will be based on the high set problems in math. So those problems are the ones that I will throw out there, maybe with a little humor in them, but they need to learn how to solve those problems. But yes, I agree with what you're saying. Thank you.
Sure. And one other thing while we got you is, have you thought of a document camera that sits, over like an old overhead projector, but it's digital?
That's what I have. I have that with a whiteboard.
Great.
Yeah, the only thing I ever say is that as I get older, I have to be, only thing with humor is make sure it's funny to them. Because
Yeah.
like I always told people when I started training or any type of thing, I used to have this this icebreaker that asked people what was the first audio in their car. And I said, I would know if someone told me only a radio or an 8-track versus someone who said I have a CD player. That gave me an indicator of their age without telling me their age. It told me the time period that they kind of grew up in. It's like if you give an 8-year-old a tape now, I've actually watched those YouTube videos where the kid plays with it and has no idea what it does because we don't even have tape decks anywhere for them to have that exposure. So only thing about humor is just to be like aware of that. But yeah,
And
go ahead.
being on Zoom, a lot of the students don't like to have their camera on. So I don't know if they're laughing at the, any jokes or not.
So
Yeah, and sometimes when I've led workshops, mostly for faculty, less so for students, I am just very honest. I'm like, it helps me to teach you if I can see your nonverbal cues, if I can see your face, if I can see how you're responding. And so if students are realizing that it's not just that they want to show, but it's really like to help you teach, they might be a little bit more open to the idea. And then just in terms of like the breakout groups, and I really like all sorts of icebreakers or kind of small interactions that students do in much smaller groups, because if there's only 2 of them, they can no longer hide in the background, like think, share kind of stuff.
Unfortunately, these students, well, they've been asked to put their videos on, but I think some of them just don't want other students to see them. And that's an issue. If we could have the Zoom show the host the videos, but not share the videos with everyone else, or yeah, the video with everyone else. I think that would be extremely helpful. So
Yeah,
other
that
students-
option I don't know of. One thing
No,
that
it isn't.
sometimes, no, I haven't heard of something like that existing, but something that might help is the virtual background settings, where if students are okay with being on camera, but they don't want to show what else is in the room. So like I have just a blur on just so it doesn't look quite as messy. But there's all sorts of virtual backgrounds in Zoom where you completely hide the space that you're in.
And we've discussed that with them. When I say we, I'm talking about Ian and I,
Mhm.
and have taught them how to do that. And one student does come in and puts this blur in the background. Another student does not, he doesn't care. But then the other students just are not on the camera at all. They're, it's just a blank screen with their name on it.
I did put in the chat, last year I did a workshop for when we were doing COVID, and it was called Resilience 101. And one of the things that faculty had said, because Beth, you're not alone in this, is that what they call the camera on, camera off dilemma. And this article I thought was really interesting. I put it in the chat for you to read. One of the things is to recognize that there's a variety of reasons why people keep their cameras off, and how do you frame having the camera on, and including the students in that conversation. That success might come from really kind of, if you just said like, maybe you're not going to have one-on-one meetings at this time because, you're starting out, you would do that differently. But if you asked students to come together in a small group, or wrote them an email and said, I really would like you to have the camera on, just as Marisha said, and being like, if you have reasons why not, please email me back. And so you can hear their voice to see why. I would think exactly, I know that we always have this, like, I know that I tend to feel like when I'm in these presentations, I know sometimes people keep their camera off because they don't really pay attention. They're not really here with me. They're doing something else. I want to separate out that, curbing that behavior from someone who might be having kids around, who might have a parent around. I know that I had one where this kid had his parents around, and he was so nervous because his parents made him nervous, and he just didn't want anyone to see what was going around him, and he didn't want to see the nervousness on his face. And so it was, it was a different conversation about having the camera off. I didn't require sessions like you have, actual sessions that are regular and scheduled. So it was okay for me to kind of be flexible on that. But so take a look at that article and see if it sparks any ideas. And then I think you said your colleague was Ian. Yeah, see if you want to share that article, and you can talk about it and kind of come up with an idea of it. But kind of just including the students in the importance of it, as Marisha said, and how can they make that decision to then flip on the camera.
And Beth, you mentioned one other thing. So you mentioned that when students have their camera on, all you see is their name. So if students really, like, you've talked to them, you've explained it, but they're like, no, I'm not turning on my camera, I'm not comfortable with that. One thing that could make it feel a little bit more personal is to do either a photo or an avatar. So when I turn off my camera, my photo comes up. And so it's not the same thing as having the eye contact and the body language, but it's a little bit better than just the name. And if they don't want to put a photo, Kyle, do you want to throw yours up for a second?
Yeah.
So Kyle has, Kyle, did you make that with Bitmoji or?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. And so, it's definitely like, it portrays Kyle's style, but it's not her photo. And again, a little bit more personal.
Yeah, and I even tell people that there are times in my class where I don't have, like, I have my videos that like welcome them, but then I have like tips and advice. I have my Bitmoji in there that's doing something crazy. Like, when we get to exam time, there's actually a Bitmoji that does that. And I feel comfortable with that technology. So it's a piece of it. It's, again, how do we personalize And then I also want to be careful I'm not making it cheesy, like that I'm not making it inauthentic. Like, oh, I don't really want to be here. I don't want to put myself on, I want you to be on the screen, but I'm not going to be on the screen myself. I think that's also, you know, a reality. Marisha and Mary and I were actually at a conversation where the presenter said exactly, was like, this is about engagement. This is about us working together as a class, and I need to see you. We need to keep the cameras on, you know, and we can talk offline if you have an issue, but no one did. I mean, it was all for professional staff. And I think that was the first time I'd heard someone say, I have the expectation that I need you. This is what this is about. And none of us question it, you know, if we
That's
were,
been said multiple times for these
So,
students.
okay.
And then one has a picture of herself, the others are just black screens.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that going in the breakout room to talk to them individually
Mhm.
would help with that also.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, anything that makes it not seem like it's a whole class and you. So sounds like a great idea. So if you're cool, I'm gonna, any other thoughts? Mary, did you have any?
The only other thought, are any of your students joining via phone, like a mobile device
Are any of your students joining via mobile devices or phones, Beth?
that you know?
I don't believe so, but I don't know.
Okay.
I just thought that might be.
I think when they normally do, you see their phone number up at the top, don't you?
If it's by phone, you see the phone and you don't actually even get a box. They're just in the
Yes.
participants list. But if it's a mobile device, you won't know if it's a computer, if it's a tablet, if it's a phone. If they're joining with the Zoom app from a phone, you won't know that it's a phone. The only time you'll know if it's a phone is if they're calling in.
I don't have any call-ins.
Yeah.
I just wondered if that would be something to do with the image.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so the next thing is, this is another video, and this one's called Norm Setting at the Beginnings of the Semesters. And again, my colleague helping me out to make sure this is working properly. So I'm going to make that bigger and you can see it, and give me a thumbs up if the audio works.
I have thought a lot about how to do norms with my classes, and I have tried many different things, and yet I still struggle with building norms, particularly around making sure that the norms that we have encourage people to challenge each other and disagree and make mistakes. I'm pretty good at making norms that allow everybody to be happy and talk to each other kindly. But what I'm looking for is really grappling, right? How do we create norms that help us grapple?
On the first day of class, we established norms. She offered a starting point, and we in small groups shared what that meant to us, things we would add, how we might complicate or clarify those norms.
In this class, this semester, I started by showing them a quote from Carla Shalabi's book that talks about the fact that love isn't just sweet, love is actually challenging people and helping people grow. And then we talked about what would that look like in the context of this class.
What I appreciated about the way she did it is she framed the norms as aspirational. I think often in classes, people think they have to set norms. So they do it and it becomes this list of 20 to 30 things that like a perfect community would do at all times. And that's not real. And then you never come back to it because it doesn't feel possible, sustainable. It ends up just being like a thing you check off that you do.
Something that I'm actually moving toward is moving away from explicit norms and moving toward thinking about what is our goal about how we want to be in this class. And the reason I'm doing that is because I have found that when we write explicit norms, sometimes they become a way for people to avoid conflict and people to not grapple. Sometimes they become a way for the dominant folks in the room to get to stay comfortable without having to feel like anything's being questioned, right? And what I want to do is create a room where all of us feel questioned, regardless of where we're coming from, so that we have the courage and the strength and the vulnerability to actually figure out what to do.
Got to go here. Yep. Go back. All right. Who wants to go first? I'm gonna say Beth again. First.
Well, I'm always on the hot seat, so for me, Zoom is the new
Mhm.
norm. Am I? Yeah, okay, I'm on. And I let the students know right at the beginning that I'm still learning. I've never done a Zoom class. And so that I need their help on doing this. I need them to show me, guide me, and correct me. Like yesterday, I didn't know that I had two screens up. So the overhead, we'll call it an overhead, and on the whiteboard, they couldn't see the problems that I was trying to teach them because it was too small, because I was sharing the screen with the PowerPoint in that. And I did have a student say, hey, we can't see that. And so it's like, oh, well, this is something new and thank you for letting me know. So I was able to stop the sharing of the screen, PowerPoint, and just do the whiteboard, which helped them out a lot. So I let them know right off the bat, I don't know what I'm doing.
I think humility is such an important thing in teaching. I think that dynamic that they walk into the room already, that if you don't want to really admit it, there's a power dynamic. There's a perceived difference between the person who is facilitating or teaching your knowledge and you. And so I think humility, even if it's not about the subject matter, humility lets them know there's a personal connection there. I think that's great. Before I forget, so in the getting to know your thing, the one thing I thought was really helpful, and it's a little harder in online, we'd have to, people have their names there all the time, but the name tags thing, when I was watching that earlier video, I thought that was something that we don't do the old school name tags thing where you actually could have to see your students' names and then eventually have that go away. I thought that was really important, and how I was trying to think how you do that online. So I wanted to bring that up because that was kind of my thing. I think in terms of the norm setting, I really like the somewhat hippy dippy kind of like aspirational pieces of things. I really do try to look towards the positives of most things. And so that poem, or that the phrase, the quote, I thought was really important. I thought that it's not a directive. And then also the students saying that, and I loved that, that it's not 10 or 20 things of what people should be doing, but it's real. And how we really behave in a class, because if it's a real class, then when we have real conflict, we have to figure it out. It's not some arbitrary thing. So to me, those two things in that video kind of, I was like, okay, yeah, you can lead off with something aspirational and also thinking about, that real context to things. Marisha or Mary? Mary is good. Marisha, do you want to inject? Okay. So those were the two videos, and thank you for participating in the activity, Beth and Marisha and Mary. And that's just the kind of stuff that we want to be able to do, is just to throw something out there and have people be able to process and talk about it. I know that we have about 15 minutes left. And with Beth, I don't know, your classes, do they follow the traditional STIC semester timeline? Do you go through the same process as we do?
It seems like they follow almost like a public school schedule.
Okay. So
I don't know.
I
don't know how that's different to STIC or not.
Gotcha. So the next part might not be as relevant for you. And so but I do want to put it on the video for people who want to watch. So every time we have one of these meetings, this graph is going to show all of the kind of academic calendar semester tasks that aren't necessarily about being in the classroom. And Beth, I would say to help you out is think about those things that you might have to do to report to the department or to your director or to anybody as well.
We do take attendance. We take attendance, and they're required to be there 90% of the time. And so that's very similar.
Yeah. So so attendance verification is a process that happens at STIC where the faculty have to acknowledge that the student is participating in the course and has completed either some assignment or some work and has been present. It's a lot easier in a face-to-face classroom to do attendance verification because most of the time, I always say there's a difference between entering the classroom, participating in class, or being present in class, and then engaged in class. And that's a really tricky thing in a face-to-face environment, because someone sitting in the back is technically attending the class, but you have to also be aware of what their engagement or participation level is as well. But attendance verification is actually a process here where the faculty have to determine if a student is going to be withdrawn from a class. And so they are marked in ARIES, which is the student information system that we have. And that's where they go in and they report students who have not actually logged in or participated in their class, and then verify their attendance in the course. That actually, that date is usually announced by the registrar. Will get an email on it, and there's various resources on the CODO website. As there's actually an ARIES page for using ARIES on that as well, which actually I could just pull that up really, really quickly because it's so fast to get to. When you're using your own computer. So the CODL, we have our own website. And if you actually go to tutorials and resources, ARIES being an A is the first thing. And the ARIES page, if you're doing anything where you have to enter anything into ARIES, is here. And when we do get attendance verification, there will be a video that'll be on the main page that explains that and actually walks faculty through how that process works. Online is a little trickier. Attendance verification really is not just about logging in, but about actually completing work and participation. Online students will sometimes just log in and not complete the actual work. And if they don't generally engage in the first week or so, it is really hard to pull them in after that week. So that conversation of making sure you're reaching out. What I normally, nope, go ahead.
For my students, they don't have a grade. It's
Okay.
all to,
complete
they're there to pass the HiSET test.
Yeah.
So we don't do grades per se. I do give them assignments and they can pass them in, but they're not required to. Now, most of the students will pass it in. They want to personally see how their achievement is going, and also see what questions they got wrong that they may need to go through again and look at. But we don't do any kind of grading. So that part's a little bit easier for me.
There you go. So then also just for new faculty, add drop is also a period of time where students can no longer add the class or they need to drop it. If they drop it during this window, there is absolutely usually no consequence, refund of any payment, and there's nothing on their transcript. I'm pretty correct on that, right? There's nothing of a deficit if you do it during the add drop period. After the drop period, you have a window of time that a student can still be removed from the class, either by the faculty member or the student can withdraw, and the withdrawal actually shows up on a student's transcript. So having that conversation with students early on to have them drop before withdrawal, because you don't really want to have too many W's on your transcript if you're interested in furthering your education. It is kind of seen as a flag at times for some four-year schools or in the future. So having that conversation with your students is really kind of important if you're in the STIC realm of classes. And then the incompletes deadline, that also comes up. Most new faculty won't have this as an issue, but as you get to teach at STIC, faculty do have the ability to give an incomplete. Beth, that probably isn't a process that you're familiar or you have to use, but the incomplete process basically has faculty where, and again, I'm giving very general, more information from your chair and your department and your dean, but you basically can give students an extension to the semester to complete a class. But we do have a deadline that has to be for the previous semester. So the deadline for summer and spring come up very shortly. So people should be aware of that if they're going to think about having incompletes in their classes in the future, to understand what that process is. And like I said, in the upcoming weeks, those other boxes will get filled. We might have more boxes depending on what comes up and everything like that. Let me go back to my little notes here. The last thing that we would have for, and I think I put it back on, I'll put it back on slide 1 here, because slide 2. So the last thing is that we have available is the teaching challenge. And so the teaching challenge for this week comes from a book that a lot of the STIC faculty a few years ago were able to participate in a book club. And the book is called The 33 Strategies. And it walks faculty through, or teachers through, a first half of a semester of teaching and the process of going through that. And so the homework challenges are going to be something where, given the guidance, and I'll have this more on the presentation, I'll make sure that that's a little bit clearer specifically, but what the goal is that this book basically is pointing out that a lot of the things that people learned in high school do not apply to college processes, college procedures. So high school students don't have syllabi. The class schedules are different. That hour and 15 isn't 50 minutes, and a bell doesn't ring to move to the next class. You don't stay in a cohort necessarily. There's things that happen in high school that may be different for college students. If a student is also not necessarily at a school that prepares them the best to go into higher education, their high school, and I think the quote was, students whose high school promoted learning habits that do not align with college academics. So that means that some schools just do not prepare their students to enter the college environment. And so some of these teaching challenges is to kind of see if there's ways that we can combat some of those issues that kind of come up. So the one strategy which we have, which was strategy 11, that comes from the book, and it's on page 46. And again, I'll make sure it's more articulated on the presentation that we send out, is to model a study guide or some type of note-taking methodology for your students. So what this means is that when you are in upcoming weeks or planning it, is have a conversation about what the best way to create a study guide, taking notes, how they can be more effective of it. It is not necessarily an assumption that in high school they took a class that taught them how to take a textbook and sit in a presentation and make notes of that. And whether it's a study guide where they make a page and they do kind of a chapter outline, or it's actually how they take notes, it might be interesting to have a couple-minute conversation about like advice that you might have. Go on a website and find some note-taking resources that are available, but something to the fact of have a specific conversation about modeling appropriate study guides or note-taking, even if it's sharing how you take notes, and kind of have a conversation to kind of help students get a sense of, every student who ever has tried to write down everything the faculty member says, they may not hear the rest of the conversation because they're focusing on it. How do you get salient or important points? So the teaching challenge that we have for this week is going to be modeling either a study guide or a note-taking methodology. And with that said, the last thing we have is the exit ticket, which I will send out to you, Beth. And so you can complete it. And it's just a simple, I think it's 4 questions to ask which session, and then a couple questions about this session and how it went, but also to help us plan for future time. So that we come to the end of the presentation / conversation and the outline for the day. Beth, are there any things that are happening in your environment that you feel like you want to talk about, or questions about STIC or anything to bring to our attention? That's probably the last thing. And then I would say happy Friday.
I can't think of anything. I'm glad that I received the email to be able to come to this meeting and get more information. I do appreciate that very much. And that's about it. I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Beth. So thank you, Beth. I appreciate you coming. And at this point, I'm going to wrap it up. So have great Fridays, and thank you for watching if you're watching this after the presentation. And thank you to Mary and Marisha for being here and helping me out and supporting me and being present. So thank you.
Thanks, Beth.
Bye, Beth.
Sorry. Bye-bye.
And I have to stop recording somewhere.